And I'm humbled, I would say, that to look at the presentation architect Dinesh Patel and Rahul Javeri has made, because in India we have so much of what you call treasure trove of heritage, and when we look elsewhere for inspiration and ideas, I think I'm sure that the way you have looked into the past, looked into the history, it is really wonderful, and I'm sure that the future generation, the coming generation, will be taking a cue from that. I will start my presentation with some infographics. So, in Bangladesh, we have been sort of in a path of development, changing the social and economic conditions, and it is showing that we have been making good progress. So in the last 10 years, the life expectancy, GDP, they have grown, and Bangladesh is a very dynamic environment now. But at the same time, pursuing this path of economic development, we did not lose the sight of our environment, our particular context, particular condition. And these measurements are now sort of indicators of how we are doing. So after this, we have another index that how we are doing. So the Organization of Economic and Cooperation Development, which is the organization of 38 countries, they have come up with a measurement. And there are 11 dimensions that have been listed out. Bangladesh is not in this one, but it shows that how the different countries, societies are faring today. Then finally, we have this World Happiness Report. We find the Danish are the most happy, the people from Burundi are this happy. And what does all this tell? It is that our present needs to be also assessed for the future. So we have health, we have well-being, we have happiness, all that relates to quality of life that we pursue. And that has to do with development. In the 80s, the whole issue of development was being questioned, and the United Nations, in the beginning of this millennium, they came up with 8 sustainable Millennium Development Goals. So Bangladesh has done wonderful in attaining these sustainable Millennium Development Goals. In 2015, we have got 16, 17 more goals to be achieved by 2030. 15 more years, hopefully the world will be a much better and a happier place. So architecture is something that also is related to improvement of the quality of life. Architects create changes, architects adapt to change situations, and architects prepare for future changes. The change that occurs in architecture is not the same everywhere. It varies from place to place, from location to location. And this variety includes environment, society, politics, economy, and culture. So I chose this quotation from Peter Buchanan. It was published in 2015. Architecture is rooted in and carries forward selectively the legacy of the past, selectively, including its lifestyles and the modes of spatial deployment that accommodate them. Equally importantly, though it must respond to the present needs and exigencies while addressing confident in its long-term validity as yet unknown future. So we are looking into the future, how we look into that. So this is the architectural legacy of the post-colonial Bangladesh, starting with architect Mazhar Islam, who went to study in the United States and coming back in the 50s, he brought in this modernity in architecture. On the left, we have this College of Arts and Crafts, the public library, a National Institute, and a dormitory for students, a big university campus. Mazhar Islam was very clear about how to go forward in a post-colonial period, because this 200 years of colonial rule had created a disruption of our traditional architecture. In the 50s, there was no school of architecture, so there was someone who had to go abroad and come back and start a new direction in architecture. Mazhar Islam was not alone. We had also other architects coming from abroad. We had Paul Rudolph, Stanley Tigan, who collaborated with Mazhar Islam. We had Doxidis from Greece. We had Bob Bui from America. So they all got together in giving a new direction to architecture in Bangladesh. We are all familiar with Khan's work in Dhaka. So when Khan came to Bangladesh, he understood the landscape and the particular cultural context. And when he built this citadel of assembly, he paid particular attention to that. The material, he used concrete because this was a huge monumental building. But for other structures, the hostels of the parliamentarians and the secretaries and ministers, he used local brick. But he invented a new language of using brick to that particular climatic condition. And even after the independence, this idea of creating a new architecture particularly suited to the particular condition which will fulfill the aspirations of the newborn nation was continued by other architects. We had architects like Bashir Haq, Rabi Hussain, Wazir Hassan, Uttam Shah, who developed a very unique contemporary architecture for Bangladesh. So this is the kind of environment that I started working, 80s. 80s, the world was getting more opening up because China had just opened to the world and things were looking, no more a very narrow and regional view of things. But even in that condition, we pursued our path. So when we look at Bangladesh landscape, it's a small country, 146,000 kilometers, big population, but even then there is a variety in the landscape. We have these lush green rice fields, you have the hills, and we have the dense urban environment. So we as architects, we are operating within that context. And in my work, I have drawn inspiration, so are many other architects, from the history and heritage, but acknowledging that it is not a static thing, it is a dynamic thing. The architecture has changes with time. Architecture changes in particular location. So we have this 8th century Buddhist monastery on the left, the Sultanate mosque from the 12th century, a temple from the 18th century, and from the colonial time, we have this university building. And at the same time, I have drawn inspiration from the rural and vernacular, and how that can inspire a contemporary architecture. Even in Bangladesh, we have a variety of vernacular architecture. So the first project that I'm going to present is a training center for a world's largest NGO called BRAC. And I have chosen 2 projects to be shared with the audience here. And they're spaced in 25 years' time, so one can understand that how I have been able to look into the particular condition. This training center is located about 145 kilometers from Dhaka. BRAC, as I mentioned, is the largest NGO in the world. They're working on the well-being, resilience, economic development, expanding horizons, empowerment, and support programs. And when I visited the site, this is what I had encountered. The site was an abandoned brick field in a rural environment, and we were asked to design a training center which will have particularly three functions. It will have academic facilities, it will have dormitories for the trainees and the trainers. So in this particular landscape, what to do? So we decided to draw inspiration from our rural and traditional architecture. So the way the houses are organized around courtyards and the spaces that are created in shade and also heightened by light, and the modesty and humbleness of the construction technology, they were to be my inspirations for my training center. So when I organized the layout, I decided to group them in a way that the three distinct functions are organized in a manner that they are linked, but yet they are separate. So we have on the right is the academic section, and on the top is the dormitories for the trainees, and on the left are the trainers' dormitory. We dug a pond. In Bengal, as it's a floodplain, we raised the land and then we built our homestay. So first thing we did, we dug a pond, and then we started building. And this is how the ground layout is organized and the circulation system. We're connected by walkways to be used during monsoon, covered walkways, but in other seasons one would walk from one to the other in the open. The first model that we made and presented to the client, showing the idea of the complex, and it started getting built. Using locally available bricks and the construction technology that would be available, you can see the pond that was dug up first to raise the mound. And it was completed in a year's time. Initially we used cement tiles, which did not work in the long term, so they were replaced by the corrugated iron sheet. The academic complex, the place of entry, the classrooms, and the big multipurpose hall. The courtyard of the academic part, the multipurpose hall, and the dormitories. So these slides show that when it was built, it was barren, but over the years now it has become green and it has blended with the environment. The shaded corridors and the hostels. For the hostels, we did not go for this regular barrack type arrangement. Rather, we went for this huts, and they were like sort of modules of dwelling units, which had the flexibility because the trainees would be both male and female, and one could allot one house to one group of people, the other to other type of people. So this is the kind of environment that has resulted. And courtyards function as a place of interaction, very done with a very tight budget. So these are the kind of spaces that resulted over in how the environment transformed a brick field, transformed into a training center. So this was right after the construction of the complex and a few years after the construction. So this is the kind of thing that we have been doing, trying to understand the site, trying to understand how the future will be transforming and how we can sort of balance man-made and the natural. And looking at this Google images from 2007 to 2017, it's very interesting to see that how the whole place has become green. The next project was done a few years back. I mean, I started working on it a few years back. So this offered another challenge, how to work in a particular site. So when I went to this site, it was basically a place which was having water. That was October 2011. So I was, when I went and saw the site, I asked the client that, what do you want to do here? I don't see any land. Then my client, she told me that land is going to emerge because this is seasonal. So this particular site remains underwater for a few months and then you have land. So you have this particular condition of inhabiting in a place which can transform. It's not a static situation. So I wanted to look into that as a design challenge. So what was my strategy? I had basically three options. One was to raise the ground, which would be a very normal option. But over there, if I needed to raise the ground, I had to go about 3 to 4 meters. And given the place where to build it, the area for putting the school would become very small. The other option was to put it in stilts. But if I put it on stilts, for 4 months you have water. But when you don't have water, the school was going to be raised way above your head and how to sort of get people. So I decided to try out an amphibious structure, which can be on ground when it's dry, and when it's monsoon, it can be floating. And how do I assemble that? How do I make that? So I looked into the traditional rafts and the pontoons, and I said, why not assemble a structure, make a structure by combining materials which were recycled and natural. So we use tires, use steel drums, and then bamboo, ropes, and we devised a structure, as I mentioned, which would be flexible for different conditions. So this is how the assembly was devised, and that's one of the classroom models. And we made a visualization that in dry condition, this is going to sit on ground, and in the monsoon, it is going to float. The site plan and the bank of a river, and it's a multi-purpose facility. It's going to function as a school in the morning, and in the afternoon it was going to be a training center for women of the villages. So we devised a very flexible design for this school, where it can adjust to different conditions. And the construction began in 2014, so the site needed to be level, and gradually things started. And as we were building, water had already come, and the structure floated. So we continued to build during monsoon, and it was completed after the monsoon. So this is how the entire process is explained. So images during construction and after completion, and again last monsoon the water, and we tested the full structure that it works. And the superstructure is of all bamboo, bamboo floor, bamboo wall, and bamboo for roof. More images during the construction. So it was fun to put it together because we were trying to combine innovation and tradition together. Because this was not a familiar technique for people to build, but they were familiar with constructing bamboo structures. We just thought that it would be a good experiment. And in monsoon, it was during the construction when the water plant appeared like this. And in the dry season, the land has emerged, mustard fields. Again, the water comes. So this was during the last monsoon. So we are waiting another monsoon. The school has gone into a trial operation. We have already started monsoon. And this is the diagram that shows the transformation of the site in the different periods of the year. So the school is run by an NGO, and for supporting the school, they started a nursery, a plant nursery, and they adopted the traditional method of raising the ground because they couldn't find that a positive idea. So they thought we will have a nursery which will raise the ground. But last year there was flooding, so they had to move the plants to the school. And the nursery was flooded with a lot of damage. So we thought that why not suggest something also for the nursery that can adopt the same technology. So by using used plastic water bottles and bamboo and rope, we designed a platform which could keep the plants. Again, using the people who had put together the school, we were putting together this flatting platform. So a prototype was made and we tested it out. It worked out well. We plan to put more during this monsoon. So again, I'm sort of saying that how do we really make people happy? Architecture of real quality is hardly about immediate impact, the visual wall, boring for people to recognize. Instead, it has to be understated richness that comes from the synthetic resolution of many factors, so that new aspects and capacities are discovered and revealed both in architecture and the user, with long-term familiarity. So this is how I have been looking into architecture in my own project. Thank you so much.
Let's now welcome architect Ahmed Zaid Khan Mesu to come on stage and begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation and being able to share with you about my thoughts on design for the ecological age, some meta principles for sustainable architecture and urbanism. The way I want to present these meta principles are based on basically 3 steps. First, framing the problem, because many issues are resolved if you try to correctly frame the problem that you want to address. And the problem is colossal, of course. We're talking about unsustainability. And that will be then followed by 2 steps. In one step, I'll share with you some of our research explorations over the last 15 years in different domains. What sort of insights we have developed there, and this will be followed by a second step, which is sharing with you some of the ideas that have emerged through design explorations. So let's try to look at, I don't know what is wrong with this. Is this a PDF?
Yeah, it's visible from the
Yeah, is it a PDF? Is it okay?
It's
Okay. Cool. Okay, that's fine. So to present the problem, I mean, on the left side, what you see here is 100% of the surface of Earth, which includes both the water and the land. And the land part is only 29%. And within that, around 1960, we had only 0.08, less than 1% of this entire surface that was urbanized. By the year 2000, over 40 years, this quadrupled, fourfold, 400 times increase of that surface. And 3 years ago, in 2014, it again more than doubled in less than 1.5 years. The estimates that we made, if this trend continues, by 2060 it will again go by quadrupling again. What is interesting is that that is not the problem. If we look at the current situation, which is about 1% of the land surface, and we enlarge it, on the right side, what you see there is about 70% of this built environment, we call it, or all the settlements and everything that is included. About 70% of it has been produced only in the last 70 years. It is 1947, 48 onwards. And what we have in that is the 30%, like all those beautiful cities that we saw in the different presentations like Jaisalmer, Jaipur, and all those compact cities. That is only 30%. So 70% of what we call with different names, sometimes we call it urban sprawl, sometimes we call it urban development, mushroom development, slums, whatever. There are different names for it. So the conclusion from this, what we draw is that quite often up till the end of the 20th century, we were told that population growth is a very big problem, which is not. Because if you look at population growth since 1960, it has increased only 3 times. Then they say, oh, urban population is a bigger problem. That has increased by only 2 to 2.5 times. The real problem is the built environment footprint per capita, which has increased 25 times. 2,500 times in 60 years. What it indicates is that the problem lies in the model of urbanization that we have followed, which is based on linear economic model. This developed since the invention of steam engine, and from there onwards, throughout the 19th century industrialization, capitalism, and now what we call neoliberal mode of extraction of resources, production of them, and then distribution that influences, that shapes our way of life. And that enables forms of urbanization that we have never thought of how to be. So the problem really amongst the research community is that how do we want to change this model, the underlying driver of which is this linear economic system. So what we have over the last 10 years, there's a lot of interest that has emerged in the idea of circular economic system. A circular economic system where you have 2 cycles. On the right side, all the materials that cannot grow. And on the left side, everything that is renewable that can be grown. So metals, steels, all kinds of gadgets, whatever, that belongs to the right cycle. And there the idea is to first think of maintaining and prolonging their use. Then followed by that, reusing it and redistributing it. And then refurbishing and remanufacturing, and only at the very last think of recycling, because it again involves a lot of energy. Similarly, for the biological renewables, finding ways of cascading, adding value to the system, into biochemical feedstock to grow more food and so on. So this is what we have increasing consensus, and the central goal in this new economic system is to design out waste. I mean, this model is by intent and by design regenerative, with the idea waste is minimized, and this has gotten currency amongst the policymakers at the European level, at general, because of the commodity prices hike. All commodities have become much more expensive because their extraction is no longer as profitable as before. So their interest in circular economy. So bigger steel manufacturers and all. So if we look at where is the waste in our system in the model. So just to share with you quickly some examples. Structural waste in the mobility system. This is an average European car, which is 92% of the time just parked. Only 8% it is used. And in that 8%, actually 5% you are driving, 1.6% you are looking for parking, and the rest you are sitting in congestion. How wasteful can we invent things to move us, which is 92% of the time just taking space? And not to mention the engine losses. To transport a human of an 80 kilo average for 2 people or 5 people in total 300 kilograms to 500 kilograms, the amount of wastage, because it has to carry 1 ton of steel. So the actual energy that you need is this tip, small tip that can move people. And not to talk about 30,000 deaths and 4 times as much as that accidents in Europe. These are figures for Europe. And 50% of our cities in Europe are taken, the space is taken by cars. 50%, more than humans. So there's a lot of opportunity of waste in the mobility system. So there are these future visions of driverless cars and mobility ecosystems where user is in command to take the itinerary, combining bicycle to aeroplanes and so on, so that these waste can be minimized. Again, looking at the structural waste in built environment, where 60% of European offices are not used even in working hours. Offices are lying empty. Single-used buildings. I mean, half of our city centers are lying empty for about 16 hours of the day. Only used for 8 hours. During the construction process, during the demolition waste, there's a lot of waste that emerges in the system. So then there are these ideas that buildings should not be seen as energy consumers, but actually buildings should be seen as places which can produce its energy and food and work, and that we don't need to buy things, we can share things as well. So these kind of models that are emerging. So in our research, we combine many of these different models to find answers to problems that are posed to us by policymakers and so on. So let me share with you one of such methodologies, because we're talking about different methods. How do we find answers for unsustainability? So this is one methodology that we use, which is called urban metabolism. Urban metabolism, like human metabolism, we need certain inputs and you produce waste, and in the process you have energy to perform a certain function. So we characterize the human activities in the city based on the inputs of water, energy, materials, food, and how much waste is generated and how much emissions are generated. Through this characterization, we are able to identify which are the hotspots, which are the areas that the system does not rely on a more sustainable pattern. So we applied this, for example, on the case of the city of Brussels, where, I mean, to cut this very complex diagram short, just to tell you that Brussels uses 20 times more energy than what it produces. So through such kind of mapping, you clearly identify what are those needs and resources that are flowing, similarly for water, similarly for food, similarly for materials of all kinds, and so on. For life cycle analysis is another methodology that we use to find answers. For example, a lot of emphasis in the European legislation went on making buildings passive, thickening them with insulation materials so that they use very less energy for heating and so on. So over 10-15 years, this process became mainstream in the society. And then the question was, is it really efficient? What is the embodied energy? The question came that, okay, with this new building, the operational energy has been reduced, but what about the embodied energy? So we found out that the embodied energy is somewhere between 21 to 68%, which is about almost 40%, which is not even covered by any rules or regulations or any design responses. Similarly, we have several other methods like urban ecosystem services, where we try to understand the capacity of the urban ecosystem that can, on the one side, on the right side, you can see how it influences the physical processes. Physical processes meaning underground water table and the air that we breathe and so on. So those are the physical processes. And on the left side, how they influence people more directly in terms of cultural well-being and so on. So we developed this methodology to actually assess the impact of sealed surfaces increase on these physical and psychological processes. Here, again, another method that we use in our research is about carbon neutral design, and another one, biomimetic design. Here, the idea is that we look at nature as a source of inspiration, not to mimic it for the way it looks, but actually how it performs. So, for example, the termite mounds are famous for cooling properties. So we study the chambers that are constructed by the termites, and we try to mimic that to different kinds of high-rise buildings and other structures, how their genius of nature can be transposed to human design. So these are all explorations by research. And now to the same problem that I framed earlier, some design exploration. So as you know, that we are all kind of interested, I mean, whether you call it the American dream or the European, I mean, it is a shared prospect that every family needs a house and a small garden. And because of that, land in the periphery is cheap, and so we continue to build those suburban houses with gardens and so on and so on. So when I graduated as a young architect, I started to practice with this idea that how can you provide a kind of a 1/4 of the size of an apartment, let's say, as a garden which has a double height, so that you can see the sky and then you can rotate it all around so that you have more deeper shades and so on. So we began to kind of experiment that, okay, instead of the city going all around, maybe the city can be constructed with this kind of a morphology in third dimension. And this experimentation sort of continued in many other forms of projects. And when I was teaching together with Charles Fourier, I mean, he also shared with me this idea of the double height sky port, which has both sides of, and this thing has become also very topical in the contemporary practices, like this is Vastu Verticale of Stefano Boeri, David Milan, and also Kenyan, the vertical forest. And what it brings us is to this degree of complexity, where these kind of roof terraces or gardens in the sky at multiple scales, this is a social space, it's a transitional space, it is an environmental filter, it is an income generator, but we don't have any regulations to allow the production of the city to be framed by these ideas. Because if you want the provision or an increase of green spaces inside the city, this is the route to go. Because horizontally, we cannot expand endlessly. But we have not yet, our administrative systems and city planning regulations have not yet, because this is again something a shot in the air. Going to the next project that I want to share with you, I'm building it up scale-wise. So this is city and green spaces. How do we ensure the provision of green spaces in the city? So here, this is a project that I did for central Brussels, where the long boulevard that was constructed during 19th century, typical Parisian boulevard style. The competition was about transforming this 800 meters long and about 90 meters wide boulevard into the greenest public space of Brussels, in fact even of Europe. So the way we kind of approached from an ecological perspective is like ecology is the relationship of parts with the whole. So what are the parts and what is the whole in this system? So we kind of identified 4 main parts that have to interact with the whole. The whole is the culture of this place, of the people. And those are biodiversity, activities, human activities, accessibility, and the different atmospheres. So we put them together and we used 3 phased reconstruction, which involved the recycling and the reuse of demolition waste within central Brussels as one layer, and events-based phasing as the next layer, and also the participation of the local residents and shopkeepers and other users in the process as well. Because I think design in the ecological age needs to go through this process dimension that relies on local resources that are channeled into not a finished product, but a process in which everyone has participated and can be owned. And then going to the 2 other scales, but I think since we are limited by time, so I'll briefly skip these parts. And this was supposed to be an introduction to you about the Greek city planners' plan for Islamabad. I'll rather skip this part. And there was even another scale of Great Lakes megalopolis of how to rethink of the urbanization around resources of fresh water and energy. And the idea of this ecumenopolis and ecumenopipos, which is the global city and the global garden. So if the trend continues of unchecked urbanization, what we'll have is more or less, this is a projection of a world with 20 billion people by the year 2100. So if this happens, how would we deal with this? The global city on the one side, but the global city can only be sustained by the global garden. All the large deserts, all the different biodiversity zones, and so on. So we have a kind of a movement on both sides. Only 100 years ago, there was no concept of national parks. Over the last 100 years, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hectares of places all around the world have been converted into nature reserves. So there are environmentalists that are protecting the big garden. And on the other side, the urbanists and developers and all industrialists who are actually not able to come with any consensus about how to deal with the urban situation. So based on these possibilities, that what we need is not a separation of the global garden or the global city, but actually a mutual coexistence of both. What can we do that can allow this mutual coexistence to exist at multiple scale levels in a sustainable way? So these are the 5, let's say, principles. The first among them is about rethinking of needs. I mean, we need to rethink that less can be more. That small can also be beautiful. That doing more with less resources is really good. We need to think of needs in terms of light, not lighting. For example, now it is emerging a common practice in the Netherlands and in Belgium that when we design a building, we identify how many lux we need. And we ask companies like Philips that, we need so much of lux, and make a contract with them for 25 years or 30 years, for instance. Now it is their job what kind of LED light or a tungsten bulb or whatever they provide. It is their responsibility because it is their product, and they'll make sure they do a good product if they have a contract to provide you 30 years. So we don't need to own lights that will go bad after 1 year or 2 years. What do I do with it? So it's better to give the job to the company who does it best. So we should talk about light. We should talk about refrigeration, not refrigerator. Why do I need to own a refrigerator? Whereas my concern is to have refrigeration. So let the company own this thing, and I just get service. When it is bad, the company can come and take it and replace it. I should pay for the refrigeration. I should not pay for the 130 kilo of material in it. It's of no use to me, and it's going waste. Whereas the company, if they buy it back, they can do better with it. Similarly, mobility, not car, and use of things, not ownership. So these are the ideas around which we need to rethink our needs. And then designing for reassembly. All of those lists, and also about lifestyles, more human power and less resource intensive lifestyle. So this is like the first meta principle when we are confronted with addressing project scale sustainability or at the scale of the city. We really need to redefine the needs. We cannot just take the client's brief for whatever it says. The second thing is that we really need to think of historic city and the ways of construction as a body of design knowledge, as it was very well illustrated by earlier two speakers, that was a no-go area in the 60s and 70s, and slowly and gradually pioneers like them began to rediscover this as a source and as a body of design knowledge. And also the vernacular as a body of design knowledge, because we need to seek inspirations from the 3,000 or 5,000 years of built history. There's a lot of collective creativity, as they put it, that resides in those practices. We need to take that. That is the second principle. The third principle is multi-scalarity, flows, and overlapping of different uses. Being smart about the use of space, about the different flows of energy, why the building which needs certain kind of an energy should receive an energy from 500 kilometers from another place. Why can't that energy source be integrated on the building itself, and so on, and mixed uses. And the third principle, which is about really nature and the city integration at multiple scale levels. Like we can talk of nature and cities integrated in so many ways that we cannot deny this integration. We talk about materials, all natural materials. Even the more industrialized ways of producing can also be naturalized increasingly. So from the material scales to biohomes, to the skins on the facades that can grow and change, to all kinds of shells, networks, scapes, and settlement systems where nature and city integration has to be mutually sort of integrated at these different scales, whether it is the decision about foundations, materials, site behavior, to the use and occupation and maintenance of that. And lastly, when we talk about an integrative synthesis or an integrated approach, we need to kind of understand this, that built environment implies an interdependency of 5 elements. Anthropos, which is a gender-free and age-free word for human being. people, nature, society, shells of all kinds, buildings, structures, high-rises, whatever, and networks of all kinds. There is an interdependency of these 5 elements if we have to look at the sustainability of our settlement system. If you look at buildings, if you look at infrastructure, if you look at one particular element, you're missing the picture. So that is why simultaneously engaging different disciplines, from urbanism, infrastructure, architecture, landscape, construction practice to resource conservation, so that we can build the models for sustainable development. And that actually implies that we have to look at every project at different levels in terms of resource. What resources? We have to start questioning what kind of resource implications this project would implicate. Also in terms of scale, what project are we designing? What kind of flows will it generate at other scales? By dimension, meaning the social, economic, and environmental, and cultural, and historical dimensions of that project. And by aspects in terms of its performance, in terms of its structure, and so on, but also in terms of time, like the temporal generational thinking in our designs, the short, medium, long-term cycles, and so on. So this is how we approach this, that these 5 elements are related to each of the elements, creating 5 interrelations that can be seen over those 5 elements through which integrated design is achieved. And this, of course, is not the idea that one person will do it, or 5 people will do it. It is a collective process of transformation towards a more sustainable lifestyle, an economic system, and built environment, in that order. Because if you try to build very sustainable project, but if the person who is inhabiting is a single person having 7,000 square meters of floor space with a Ferrari and Lamborghini, I'm sorry, I mean, such buildings also got a LEED platinum label, by the way, in California. So the idea is that we need a kind of a collective process that is shared by societies, by individuals, by residents, and this is why it becomes so complex. But anyway, the bottom line that I want to conclude my presentation with is that sustainability is a process. It is a paradigm shift that is taking place. There are many believers, there are many non-believers in this new paradigm, and it is emerging. It is being shaped by many different forces, by natural catastrophes, many other things that trigger it, but we are slowly and gradually coming out of our modernist, reductionist visions of design, and we're moving in this process. So nothing is definitive. It is an open process, because only an openness of this process will allow its acceptability by all. Because without a wider societal acceptance of those norms, we cannot think of a change that happens in the design of systems, of built environment, and so on. Thank you for your attention. So for those of you who have any particular question, you can already prepare it, and we'll come back to those questions. So before we start with that, I would like to have a brief reflection by the earlier speakers, because one of the things that we were trying to actually struggle with is which methodologies for sustainable architecture, what kind of method, what is the use of the method. I mean, there was this reference to Qaeda, for instance, in the traditional craft-based work. There is a different methodology at work in the work of architect Saif. So maybe we can initiate our first reflection by our speakers as to what do they think in terms of this before we open the discussion with the audience. So maybe we start with the first speaker.
To me, judicious choice is extremely important. And that's where we can start. Like he had said in his presentation, identification of problems. Because there are so many things. For instance, you won't see a traditional building or the methodology that we are suggesting, which is really going back to locals doing the local buildings for whatever the needs are. Because in all this sustainability racket, if I may say so, that is being marketed right now, there is no mention of waste production. The number of trucks that go out, the number of material that goes out as a wastage, no talk about it. Embodied energy that he exemplified, no talk about it. Because when you mine a stone in a stone country and bring it to site from 30 kilometers, the embodied energy is very low. There is no mention of lime in the entire sustainability discourse. A material that has longevity, that is alkaline, very highly alkaline, therefore antifungal, antibacterial, that continues to breathe. It is recyclable in Jaipur, in Chandpur area. During conservation processes, we remove the plaster to replaster the Chandpur. And the traditional craft persons told us, "Sir, isko istemal, you can still use this." How? Say, just as a substitute partial substitute for sand. Not with the quality of the original. A 250 years plus old material being reused in new processes is not even thought of as sustainable. A material that increases the longevity of the building does not produce any wastage, is not thought of as. So, when we talk of methodologies, I think it's a question of going back to basics. The basics methodology. We are talking about maximizing savings instead of minimizing consumption. That's the methodology. How do we put it in better words that question the needs? Start with the needs. We are saying reduce consumption, not consumption of energy, but reduce needs. And so, to me, methodology from our perspective has been, how do we do things that we need simply, efficiently, and ensure that it lasts long and does not require excessive maintenance.
We're talking about I think that we have to keep in mind that it's also an evolving world that we live in. Every day there's something new coming up, and it's a changing environment. And I mentioned that the change is not uniform everywhere. There are certain things that we need to look into that in that light. Here in say South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we have a large population and who also aspires life of a certain standard, certain quality. And when we are going to address that, we need to also have innovation taking place. Interesting knowledge that is existing, but how do we take it out for masses? how can all these crafts, all these practices, they can be made to taken into housing or public places, that kind of thing. So in Bangladesh, what we have been looking into, one is the issue of finding the solutions to all these problems that needs to be addressed immediately. Also looking into long-term things. What I had shared was particular section, but in the urban areas there's also a lot of innovation. So we need to sort of continuously work out and evolve. I mean, your research in that way indicates that kind of a thing, that we need to continue to find that what could be the right approach. So I think that we have to find a very balanced way of looking into things. That's what I'll talk about methodology.
I think we need a paradigm shift, like what he said, going from linear economy to circular economy. And a major change has to come from designers. And first we start with education. Unless all this is introduced as part of education, no one is going to be able to use it, because you don't even have the confidence to use it. Not that you have the confidence, you have been given false confidence to use the other materials. Because you have some exposure to that in your education. That's one thing. Secondly, we have to get out of this new thing. Every few days, every few months, you need a new product. And that's a great marketing strategy, but we are using up so much of resources in that. And this new product is not long lasting. And it's full of chemicals which are toxic, most of it. Whether you take fabrics, we've been having fires every other day in Ahmedabad, and one of them was a fabric store, upholstery, etc., whatever. It caught fire just like this with one short circuit, because most of the material was inflammable, because all that was synthetic material. And it's those toxic fumes also which harm us. And we have not covered the health issues which are created by these new materials that you don't even know they are using such chemicals. And there is enough research, if you even Google it, on each material that you use, whether it's part of your just soap, liquid soap, how many things are there, or a part of your shampoo that can cause problems to your liver, etc., liver, kidney, heart, etc. And we are not aware of it, we are not made aware of it. So we think progress, we think that is progress because it's something new, some new chemicals, but have they been tested out? No. Do they tell you? We have seen a program on cancer, what is it called? Politics of Cancer in US in '76, where what they submitted to FDA were researchers, if at 75 weeks of experiment, if it created cancer in rats, they would submit their research up to 50 weeks. And this I'm talking in '76, and it's been going on. So we have to wake up. There has to be awareness that has to be created, even through such programs that we have, assembly that we have. But unfortunately, all this is also funded by people who are coming up with new things, who are making us buy those things and use them in our buildings. So they also need to have a paradigm shift and make things which are going to be long lasting, that use less energy, less embodied energy. And in countries, in our developing countries, we need to use more people energy, not the mechanical energy.
Okay, so do we have any questions from the audience for any of the speakers? One.
Can we have the lights off? I can't even see. They'd like to look.
Please introduce your name and where you're coming from.
My name is Apeksha. I'm a practicing interior designer from Delhi, graduate from SIT September. Sir, my question is for Saif sir. So the idea of having a floating nursery was brilliant. one question, the bottles which were used, were they plastic? So why? When we are talking of, eco-friendly materials here, so was that just for the weight as a constraint, or was there any particular use of plastic as a material?
We used the steel drums for the flotation, but they were it's a recycled one. So with the plastic bottles are already here. They will end up somewhere. We have a lot of recycling. So we thought that maybe we extend the life of this bottle because in that way, maybe we can sort of create a little bit of a more sustainable environment. So these plastic bottles are, when you recycle a bottle, it's a lot.
Hello everyone, my name is Arman and I'm from Bangladesh. Thank you for these splendid presentations that you genius people just delivered to us, especially Architect Saiful Haq for the presentation. And I have a question for you, Ahmed, that you have said something about the rental items, refrigeration and maybe the other part, but I think I have skipped if you have said anything about the car or the mobility things, the solutions for those things.
So I think the ideas that are emerging is no ownership of car amongst young people. People who are living in Northwestern Europe, Brussels, London, Berlin, most of these cities, young people who graduate, they don't want to buy a car. They want to just buy a car membership of a car sharing fleet. It's much cheaper for them. It costs very less for very practical reasons, and it is available anywhere all over the city. There are many stations. So all they need to do is to pay for the amount of time that they use the car. Because if you buy a car, you have invested your money in it, and it is then standing there. You need to find a parking space for it. And then you have to pay taxes on it, road tax and all the rest of it. And it's maintenance. And what if the car is 2 or 3 years or 5 years older? It will increase its maintenance. So a lot of young people don't believe in the idea of buying a car. It's much.
We carry too many things with us. If we make use of the mobility, the number of things that we carry with us will automatically get reduced. And this requires actually a paradigm shift of ownership was wealth for us. And that will change. Ownership does not represent wealth because we thought we own it, that's an asset. So in troubled times we will sell it. And that's why the gold reserves are maximum in India.
Last question,
I hope so. I'm architect Tripta from Punjab. Basically, being practicing as an architect in a small city, we have a question that we get many small houses to design, and the client requirement is to use the maximum space area for their bedrooms or for their drawing rooms or any of the personal use. But the problem we face is that we cannot give the proper natural lighting, natural ventilation to them, but they don't want to compromise. So what should be the solution in that? Instead of using artificial lighting, artificial mechanism, we want to give them the natural thing, but they are not ready to accept it.
Our also does farming, organic and biodynamic. So the perspective is much wider on how to convince people.
See, basically you have to create awareness. You have to create awareness through whatever health issues, etc. You have to work hard at it.
But there might be some natural solution for the buildings.
That also you have to work hard.
Yeah, we
You
do
have to look at
experiment, we do
options.
suggest them.
But you need to convince them through various ways that you have to derive. you have to show them what is, upward mobility. Now, how the norms are changing. Say Europe, West, that you don't need that much space, you don't need to keep all that. And even I am trying to change myself.
So like it's the same that we need to change our way of living.
Way of living. That is something that one needs to talk to them about. Just my WhatsApp group, where I have people, I'm trying to market the product. I produced a lot first. I realized unless I have a market, no one is going to buy. These people, they are learned, rich housewives or even professionals, but they are not even aware of what these chemicals do to them.
Thank you, speakers. It was a wonderful session. I would now like to invite Mr. Ashutosh Agrawal and architect Satish Wadia to come on stage and do the felicitations. Architect Ahmed Said Khan. Architect Nimish Patel. Architect Parul Zaveri. Architect Saiful Haq. Mr. Harsh Bhutani, Managing Director of Rabbit. Mr. Harsh Bhutani. Manager, North India and Craft. Mr. Siddharth Gupta from Elite Window Factory. Thank you all. We come to the end of 19th ARCASIA Forum Technical Sessions. Please join us for high tea and do visit the building material exhibition showcase. Thank you.